Wonderful Amy Mead with the North Carolina Cooperative Extension. Amy has worked with Extension at the new Hanover County Arboretum for many years, and she was hired recently as the Area Natural Resources Agent for Pender, Brunswick, and New Hanover counties. And in this role, she assists residents with issues related to water quality, stormwater, erosion, and native habitat restoration. Amy's background is in coastal ecology. She has a master's degree in biology from Florida Atlantic University, and she studied seagrass ecology and water quality in the Everglades and the Florida Bay. She and County Extension Director Lloyd Singleton have also been instrumental in helping island wildlife and the North Carolina Wildlife Federation in the ongoing Carolina Beach Lake Habitat Restoration Initiative. And phase 1 was completed in December, and we restored over 300 feet of shoreline. And we're tremendously grateful for their expertise and partnership. Amy's a champ. Today, Amy's going to speak on native pollinator plants, and particularly those suited to our coastal climate. So I'll turn it over to Amy. Thank you.
Unmute would help. Good afternoon, everyone. So delighted to be here. And thank you, Virginia and Wildlife Chapter for inviting me here to talk. Virginia kind of said, hey, we're going to start this speaker series. Would you like to give a talk? And I kind of thought about what I would like to talk about. And I'm super passionate about plants. I love gardening. I've worked at the New Hanover County Arboretum for many years. And so I've just collected a ton of favorite plants. So I'll share my screen here. So the title of my talk is Spring Dreamin' Pollinator Plants for Coastal North Carolina. And you could really name this Amy's Favorite Pollinator Plants because, this for all of us this past year has been really hard, for a lot of different reasons. But one silver lining of last year was that I got out in nature a lot more. And, I work outside. So, but last year I really was intentional about slowing down and really looking at things. And so I took a lot of pleasure in looking at all the different pollinators. And it makes me so happy to see bees and butterflies in my garden. And so I'm really intentional about planting plants in my garden because I want those bees, I want those butterflies in my garden. These are all pictures here. On the top left, this is a hoverfly that's in Brunswick Nature Park. That's on a native wildflower called groundsel. Over here on the top right, you can see a thread waist wasp. That's hard to say 3 times, but just such a fantastic wasp with this tiny little needle thin waist, and it's got an iridescence to it. Butterflies down on the bottom, that's a black swallowtail on a vibrant azalea. And then here the powerhouse, one of the heavyweights of the pollinator world, a bumblebee. And I always delight in seeing them covered in pollen. And I always love it when you see a little bee that's fallen asleep on a flower at the end of the day when they've sort of chilled down. So really, we're just going to talk about, what you can include in your yard to help draw these and support pollinators in your own garden. So let's go ahead and get started. Maybe. Hold on a second. There we go. So what is a pollinator? So a pollinator is any animal that carries pollen from the male to the female parts of the flower for reproduction. And so usually that happens, with insects, they're collecting nectar, and then they might be collecting pollen, or they might brush up against it. So they're going to be carrying that pollen from one plant to the next. So just like this really fun little cartoon says, you'd be taking those male gametes from from the pollen over to the female parts of the other flower, and thereby, creating seeds for the next generation of those plants. So who are our pollinators here? We have things that you wouldn't think of as pollinators, like hummingbirds and bats. And then we have things like wasps and flies, beetles, and other insects. Those are all really important pollinators. We have things like butterflies, moths, and skippers. And then we have really kind of the workhorse of the pollinator world, which is our native bees and honeybees. So, you know, really an image that comes to mind when you think about bees is honeybees, which they're extremely important for agriculture. But here in North Carolina, there are over 560 species of native bees here. And a lot of those are going to be solitary bees. So they're going to be maybe ground nesting bees or bees that nest in cavities and things like that. So we can think about the flashy honeybees, but there are really just a great diversity of our native bees. And we really want to think about planting native plants that are going to help support those native bees in our yards. So why are pollinators important to us? 3/4 of our flowering plants on Earth rely on this animal-mediated pollination to reproduce. So, you know, some plants might rely on wind to blow their pollen, but a lot of these plants have really heavy pollen, and they really need those pollinators to move that pollen from plant to plant. And for agriculture and for our own food web, for our food production, 1/3 of the world's crop production relies on pollination. Something we can think about here in our own region is blueberries. That's a $57 million crop. We do use honeybees to pollinate that crop, but there are actually two native bees, blueberry bees, that's an actual bee, and there are bumblebees. Those are incredibly effective native pollinators that are absolutely essential to pollinating the blueberry fruit. And bumblebees are actually more effective than honeybees in terms of pollination. They're better at it than actual honeybees are. And lastly, by providing habitat and food for insects, you're actually providing a food source for birds and other wildlife. So you're really supporting food webs and ecosystems in our region that depend upon those pollinators for their own reproduction as well. So let's think about, you know, pretty typical yard here. You know, I would call this, you know, the typical American yard. This is a nice house and a new development. But when you look at this picture, the only thing that you're seeing here is a little bit of turf. You're seeing your very lovely square-shaped shrubs, or, you know, if they're round, we call them meatballs here. And there's really nothing in this yard that is going to support insects or wildlife. You know, there's nothing flowering. I think you could even call this, you know, somewhat of a food desert. And you could say, you know, well, but I mean, this is just one yard. But if you take urban areas as a whole, those residential yards add up to a lot of space that is essentially a desert for wildlife. So I'm going to show you the same house, but they've turned this aesthetic on its ear here. Same house, and they have absolutely torn up all of the turf. They've put in, you know, just a beautiful diversity of plants. I see some yucca in there. I see some, you know, maybe some Shasta daisies, all kinds of really beautiful flowering plants, a great variety, a great diversity. There's shrubs in the back, a diversity of shrubs. You don't just see one line of the same kind of shrub. There it looks like the neighbor has a lovely redbud over there. You know, this to me would be the dream yard, but certainly this would be a lot of work, and it would be a lot of work to change your yard from, you know, all turf to all plants or all flowering plants. And so, you know, this might be too much for you, but what you can do to help pollinators is you can create really a diverse native landscape, and you can think about including some of these native plants in your landscape. No need to rip everything out, but just work to include some of these native plants in your yard. So that's really what I'm going to talk about today. I'm just going to talk about some beautiful plants that you can include. Mostly I'm going to talk about perennials, but I am going to start with one native tree that is one of my favorites and very common in this region. This is the eastern redbud. So really common tree. It's a really small deciduous tree. Deciduous means that it's going to lose its leaves in the winter time. And it's probably going to be, depending on the variety, 10 to 15 feet tall, maybe 20 feet tall for some of the largest varieties and at absolute maturity. Now, the thing that I love about this tree is that it has these gorgeous, vibrant purple blooms. And it's going to be one of the earliest blooming trees. So here in our region, when it's starting just to start warm up and the bees are starting to come out, they're going to be looking for these flowering trees. What's interesting too about these blooms is you can see that the blooms come right off the stem. They're going to arrive before the leaves. This is a particular variety. It's called Rising Sun. This is on the wedding lawn at the Arboretum. So if you come out this spring, you'll get a treat to be able to see this and some of the other varieties of redbuds. The other really like side benefit of these, this beautiful flowering tree is it has this amazingly gorgeous foliage as it's blooming or as it's starting to leaf out in the spring. I like this variety Rising Sun because you can see the terminal leaves here come out this lovely apricot color, almost an orangey color, and then it has this ombre effect like orange, yellow, chartreuse green, and then a darker green. I just love to see that gradation of color. So you get this beautiful bloom, and then you get this really treat of the foliage coming out. So just a beautiful double whammy in the spring. Lots of different other varieties, but this is certainly one of my favorites. I also love, this is very sweet, our redbuds have those little heart-shaped leaves. That always makes me very happy. And so if you do have redbud, you may have seen something like this on your redbud leaves. You can see these little half circles taken out of the edges of the leaves. This is actually the work of a leafcutter bee. Leafcutter bees, their favorite trees around this region are going to be redbuds and maples. They take these little, they do just what they say. They take little cuts out of the leaves, and they are cavity nesting bees. So you can see down here, what they're going to do is they're going to take those little leaf parts. They also like to cut parts of flower petals out. They especially like petunias, which I think is very sweet. They're feathering their little nest with soft petals. But they're going to create these little chambers. So what they'll do, you can see the leafcutter bee actually collects pollen on her abdomen. She's a single solitary female. She's going to lay an egg in the first chamber and put a little bit of pollen, then make another chamber. So she has these series of chambers that are brood chambers for her larva, and then eventually those will all hatch out. So this is the idea, when you put in these bee houses, these are going to be little cavity dwelling bees, but you can also, leave stumps in your yard. You can leave stems and things like that. These are all going to be perfect habitat to help out your leafcutter bees. So no worries if you see this on your redbud. It's just an aesthetic issue. It's not going to hurt your tree at all, and it's going to help out Mama leafcutter bee here from making her nest. So now we're moving on to Amy's favorite perennials here. And this is hands down my favorite pollinator plant in my yard, mountain mint. This picture is for my yard, and I always try to take pictures of it every year. It is always a buzz in pollinators, and I always try to get as many in the picture as I can, and I always fail miserably. But this picture here, you can see we've got a bumblebee or a carpenter bee, another kind of wasp right here. This is a really beautiful iridescent green here, another fellow right here. I think there might be a little corner right there, but it is just the diversity of bees and wasps that it draws is just fascinating to watch. It's going to grow about 2 to 3 feet tall. It has these silvery white leaves that are beneath the flowers, kind of inconspicuous flowers. They're just these kind of green flowers with these little florets on the little white florets. But the silvery leaves are downy. They're very lovely. They do, if you crush the leaves, it does have a minty smell to it. It does spread, so mountain mint does spread aggressively. All of these mountain mints, there's a couple different varieties. They will spread aggressively, but they're easy to pull up. But I would definitely say wherever you plant them, make sure it's a place where they're either bound in or you don't mind it spreading a little bit. Because of that spreading, it can help with erosion. So if you have a spot where you want a plant that's going to do well, good sunny spot, it can help with that. It's really drought tolerant, just a great plant for this region, and it's something that I love to watch. Another great plant that I was introduced to last year is spotted horse mint. This is a monarda, so this is related to the bee balms. It is a type of bee balm. Just a fantastic plant. We have this planted in masses in our stormwater infiltration zone here at the Arboretum. And it's a really neat looking plant. It's going to grow about 2 to 4 feet tall. It's an herbaceous perennial, so it's going to die back to the ground at the end of the season. Super drought tolerant. You can see it's got these really interesting colors to it. These are actually leaf bracts, and this is the flower right here. This little yellow. Can you see my cursor? I don't know if you can or not. Nope. Okay. Oh, you can. Okay. So these are the flowers here. These little yellow tubes, and you can see they kind of open up a little bit. And this is the perfect shape for little bumblebees. They like to jam their heads right inside there and get the nectar. But just such a neat looking flower. And it was very, very popular with bees this year. It makes a good cut flower. I'll say that about several flowers that we go through today, because I love to cut flowers and bring them in the house. Hope my pollinators don't mind sharing with me every once in a while, but this one lasts if you cut it. Also, if you have issues with deer, coming in and munching on your flowers, or rabbits, this plant is a little bit deer and rabbit resistant, so it should hold up a little bit if you have problems with that. To me, one of the absolute stalwarts of your pollinator garden has got to be purple coneflower. It's a great plant. It produces tons of pollen and nectar for bees and butterflies. A lot of different varieties of it. The typical native kind is going to be about 2 to 3 feet tall, and it's going to bloom all the way from the summer through to the fall. And then if you can leave those seed heads after they're done blooming, then you're going to be providing seeds for your birds into the fall and winter. Especially goldfinches really like those seeds on the purple coneflower head. Again, this is also deer resistant. One thing I like is that I always have a rule. I don't like prima donnas in my yard. If it does not work in my yard, like it's out of there and I'm going to put in something that's going to grow easy and well. Purple coneflower is easy to grow, and it reseeds itself. It will come back. It's a perennial, but then it'll make babies, and you can dig those babies up and plant them elsewhere. So just a great plant, and such a beautiful pop of color. A great cut flower for bringing in the house. Little note on cultivars. There are a lot of different cultivars, and this is, a little bit of a evolving controversy about, whether or not we should have straight natives or we should have cultivars. There are a lot of cultivars that, we've been cultivating plants forever, so, this is nothing new. A lot of plants are, chosen from plants that grow in the wild that have good traits. Maybe they have different color, or they are dwarf varieties. So I generally don't have problems with cultivars. We grow a lot of them here at the Arboretum. For instance, this one on the left is a cultivar of coneflower called Powwow White. And it was planted in masses in our stormwater infiltration zone, and it was a big hit. It still performs the same function for pollinators out in the garden. Something that you should try to avoid or think about is something like the plant on the right. I want to say this one is called razzmatazz or something like that. This is a double blooming. It's got double the petals on there. This is going to provide no benefit for pollinators. They can't access any pollen, no nectar. So while this is very pretty, this is maybe a cultivar that you would avoid if you wanted to really provide benefit for pollinators. And I will say, I've actually tried these ones in my garden, and I did not find them to be very well performing. They got really top heavy and they flopped over. They're a no for me. So we'll talk about probably a couple other cultivars as we go along. Oh, here's one. So this is Stokes Aster. This is asters are wonderful. This is the only aster I have in here, but any kind of asters are fabulous for pollinators. Stokes Aster is a particularly good native. There are other asters that are later fall blooming asters, and those are great for when everything else is spent in the garden. You're still going to have something blooming for those late foraging pollinators. This Stokes Aster is about 1 to 2 feet tall. The neat thing about this is that it is a perennial, but the leaves actually persist. They stay there through the winter. So a lot of perennials will absolutely die back, to the ground in the winter time. But these actually have a little rosette of leaves that stay there in the winter, so you can at least see where they are, and it has a little bit of green left there. Gonna bloom, during the summer. I thought this was such a beautiful variety this year. It's going to take full sun or part shade. This cultivar is actually called Peachy's Pick. So here's an example of a cultivar. This is found in a garden of a lady named Peachy in Mississippi. She was a master gardener in Mississippi, and she found this variety in her garden, and then it was cultivated from there. And this is actually very upright. Stokes Aster, straight from seed can sometimes, flop a little bit. This one actually stays quite upright, and it has these really lovely, I thought the petals were really lovely cut like this. So just a nice pick for the garden. And actually I planted 3 of these this year, so I'm excited to see how they come out. Here's one of my favorite plants. I'm going to say that about all of these. BlackEyed Susans, just a beautiful, vibrant yellow color in the garden. You can see these are 2 tiny little native bees. They have got little pollen pouches on them. They are busy. Just a great flower for providing pollen and nectar for our native bees. It's going to bloom summer all the way through the fall. Interesting thing about BlackEyed Susans is it is a short-lived perennial, and so it probably won't come back. That same plant won't come back, but it does really easily reseed in the garden. And the good thing is that if you plant it by seed in the spring, it will bloom that year. This is actually out in the Arboretum garden, so just a great plant, but short-lived. Sunflower, we don't think about that as a pollinator plant, but it's actually a fantastic pollinator plant. Bees go wild for it. There are 150 species of sunflower, and most of them are native to North America. My husband drives me wild. He plants these mammoth ones in the middle of my garden bed, and he doesn't tell me until they're 3 feet tall. And where did that come from? But I do love seeing them, and I absolutely adore loving seeing the bees out there on them. Another side benefit is, once they're done flowering, you can leave the seed heads for the birds. Sometimes I'll even cut the seed heads off and hang them on the fence, and it's like a free bird feeder for your birds there to get the sunflower seeds after it's done. Or sometimes the squirrels also will come and get them. Joe Pieweed is a great pollinator plant for our region. It's going to grow really, really easily. Moist or sandy soils, it's really pretty ubiquitous. It doesn't mind full sun. It doesn't mind a little bit of shade. Going to bloom all summer through the fall. And, I definitely saw a lot of butterflies on this year. It does grow very tall. The straight species of, or straight variety of Joe Pieweed is going to be maybe 6, even 8 feet tall. So if you have a really natural area, or you might want it in the back of your pollinator border or pollinator garden. But if this doesn't fit for your garden, there is a dwarf cultivar called Little Joe. That's going to be a little better behaved, but have similar looking flowers. And the deer don't like to eat this at all. And this is also good if you have a pond or something like that, more natural area. This will grow great there as well. Now you've heard of Black-Eyed Susan, but have you heard of Brown-Eyed Susan, her cousin? I don't know. This was a delight this past summer. It's just a great workhorse of a pollinator plant. It's great for heat. It's really drought tolerant. It's really got a long blooming season. It's going to bloom, it will bloom as long as the weather will let it. So it's going to bloom all summer long into the fall. It is another one of those short-lived perennials, but it is going to reseed easily. It's got these blooms are smaller, maybe $half size, smaller than a Black-Eyed Susan, but they're more numerous. I really enjoyed using this as a cut flower because it brings these little pops of color in these really dark centers. So just a lovely plant. You may have seen this blue mist flower on the sides of the roads this fall. A really lovely purple color, and it is a native plant. It does very well in roadsides and ditches. It does actually look like the plant ageratum, so sometimes people call it hardy ageratum. It's going to bloom. It's a later blooming plant. It's going to bloom summer through the fall. It's really a nectar-rich plant. So, you know, in the fall, when a lot of things aren't blooming anymore, bees and pollinators are going to be looking for plants like this. A word of caution, it does spread aggressively by rhizomes and seeds. So wherever you plant it, make sure that you want it there, because it will make itself at home. This is absolutely one of my favorite plants, passion flower vine. I just think this is one of the most beautiful and weirdest flowers. It's got this, I always think this looks like space aliens invented a flower. It's got these crazy little squiggly petals. It's got this really intricate, you know, male and female structures here. And it's just such a great flower. And there are different varieties that are different colors. Some people call these maypops. I think there are two reasons for that. It does produce a passion fruit, which looks like a small tennis ball. And when you step on them, they do pop, you know, they kind of pop. The other reason is that passion flower vine is very hardy, and it spreads by rhizome and seed. And so it may pop up here and it may pop up there. You know, it's gonna, if it's in your garden, it's gonna pop up elsewhere. It's pretty easy to pull up if it's growing on things you don't want. But you know, it will grow over your hedges. It's not aggressive like kudzu or something like that, but it does tend to wander. It's going to grow on stream banks and roadsides. And to me, the most important part of this plant is, beyond its beautiful bloom, is that it is the only host plant for Gulf fritillary butterflies. I'm sure this is a butterfly that you all have seen. This beautiful orange butterfly here. You know, here it is on a Mexican sunflower, which is not a native plant, but very, very nice. It attracts a lot of butterflies. Here's the caterpillar of the Gulf fritillary butterfly right here, and he's munching away on the passion flower vine. So these butterflies must, you know, some butterflies, they have very specific host plants, and this is, you know, so if we want to have these Gulf fritillary butterflies, we need to have passion flower vine for them to complete their life cycle. A word of note about, you know, I'm sure you all have seen, you know, a lot of people will say, leave the leaves, you know. We tend to want to ruthlessly clean up things in the fall, but right over here on the top right, this is the chrysalis for the Gulf fritillary butterfly. And this is on the dead vine at the end of the season. And this to me looks exactly like a dead leaf. And, you know, it was meant to be camouflage. But if we clean up this vine, we might be throwing away next year's butterfly. So they will hatch out during the season, but then there will be ones that overwinter and then hatch out in the spring. So, you know, just think about that when we're cleaning up. How can we, you know, maybe rake our leaves into our garden beds, things like that, because there may be a lot of chrysalis and other things that will be overwintering, and we want to help protect them. This is another great vine, the coral honeysuckle. I just think it has such this amazingly vibrant red color to it. It's a non-invasive vine, great for training up a trellis. It's going to bloom in the spring, and you have these beautiful red flowers. And this is going to attract hummingbirds to your garden. You can almost see how these plants were designed to attract hummingbirds or things with a really long tongue, a really long beak, to get down in there and bury its face right here so it can collect some pollen and then pass it on to the next flower. So you can see how nature has these amazing designs here. I definitely find that hummingbirds, things like sulfur butterflies are going to be more attracted to red flowers. So I definitely think this is a wonderful plant. If you love seeing hummingbirds in your garden, coral honeysuckle is just going to be a fantastic native vine. I love seeing butterflies in the garden. I work all the time to attract more and to have more host plants for them. So I'm always trying out new, not new, but different varieties of milkweed for my monarch butterflies. This is my favorite one and seems to be the hardiest and grows really well here. It's called butterfly weed, but it is an Asclepias tuberosa. We planted this in masses in our stormwater infiltration zone here at the Arboretum. And you see it has these lovely orange flowers that were a big hit with both the adult butterflies, but also bees really seem to enjoy them. It's going to be a really, once it's established, it's going to be a really drought tolerant, and it's a little bit salt tolerant. So, you know, you guys down there in Carolina Beach, I think it would do well down there. And it's going to be able to grow in sandy, poor soils. Does take a little time to establish. So if you grow it by seed, you know, it's going to be a couple years before it's, you know, going to get any size and really bloom. But once you get it planted somewhere, it doesn't transplant well. So if you have it planted somewhere, it's not going to be easy to plant it, you know, to dig it up and plant it somewhere else in your yard. And like I mentioned, it's you know, Asclepias milkweeds are the only larval host plants for monarch butterflies. We did find that it did better when we planted in masses. And when I say in masses, I mean multiple plants, you know. So it's easier, I think it's easier for the monarchs to find them, and it allows for more food source for them too when you plant a lot of them in masses like that. Here's a picture later of the same plant. These are the beautiful, what a gorgeous colors they are. I just think that's fantastic. These are the beautiful monarch butterfly caterpillars. You can see here's the adult. And we actually get a lot of calls here at the Arboretum, and people will say, help, the butterfly or the caterpillars have eaten all of the plant, and what do I do? And so sometimes, you know, don't do this to us, but sometimes people bring us caterpillars and we'll go put them out there, and, you know, but they ate us out of house and home this year. And you can see here, this is the chrysalis for the monarch butterfly. So what I always find fascinating too is, you know, they're huge and they're munching, and then all of a sudden the next day they'll be gone and you can't see them anywhere. They do actually travel quite a ways to find a nice safe spot to build their chrysalis. I just think this is such a wonderful thing, and I love to have it in my garden. Oh, here's your moment of zen today. Let's see if it actually works. You guys can make your own nom 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 noises. I mean, they just go to town. They are just little eating machines. Yeah, so we had a lot of fun watching all the monarchs this year. So if you live in a hot, sandy place, blanket flower might be a good flower for you. You guys have probably seen it if you're walking along any of the barrier islands. This plant is just, I mean, it grows in absolute pure sand in the full sun. It's drought and salt tolerant, a great native plant, and it's going to bloom all the way summer to fall. It's going to be really attractive to butterflies, and I just think it has a lovely color to it, that red and yellow color to it. Just a great flower and absolutely adapted to our climate right here. So just a nice flower to add to your garden. So we've talked a little bit about butterflies as we've gone along. This is, I am always delighted to see, this is a black swallowtail butterfly. And I always plant parsley, or I also have bronze fennel. The host plants for black swallowtail butterflies are going to be plants from the Apiaceae family. That's the carrot family. So if you planted carrots in your garden, they would eat the carrot tops. But parsley and fennel are in the carrot family. So those are going to be host plants for you. We definitely get a lot of calls here at the Arboretum, at our extension plant clinic, saying like, worms are eating my parsley. And, you know, people are very upset about this, but they are, you know, intrigued to find out that, oh no, they're not just worms. These are going to become beautiful butterflies. So I would encourage you to plant extra parsley if you have if these butterflies visiting, and consider sharing your parsley with them. Even if they eat their parsley down all the way to the nub, your parsley will grow back So your plant will not be harmed in the long run. You might have to go buy some parsley from the grocery store. That being said, these are obviously not native plants. So I'm actually trying out a new plant this year. It's called Golden Alexander, or Zizia. So this plant is a native in the Apiaceae family. It has these great yellow flowers on them. And it's, so I'm excited to try this. I bought 3 of them last year at the Native Plant Festival. They're supposed to be really attractive to bees and butterflies, and this is supposed to be a native host plant for the black swallowtail caterpillar. So I will report back on how well this plant did. Sometimes plants that do well in Piedmont aren't going to do well here, so I will be interested. I'm very hopeful that this plant does well. So if anybody in the comment, after we're done, has grown this plant, I'd love to hear from you. Here's another plant in the Apiaceae family, which you would never think that these plants were all related, but this is Rattlesnake Master. This actually has these strappy, really tough fibrous leaves. It almost looks to me like yucca, and you can see that reflected in its species name, Yuccafolium. That means yucca-like foliage or leaves. So this is just such a neat plant. It's a really extremely drought tolerant, really hardy plant. It's got this long tap root that helps it, be drought tolerant. It's a very attractive to insects, especially small butterflies. We've got a lot of skippers and bumblebees and things on this. As I mentioned, it is in the Apiaceae family, and so if you actually crush the leaves of it, it smells like carrots, which is kind of crazy. Here's the flower of it right here. I wrote an article. I heard people related them to fuzzy disco balls, which I thought was fun description of the flower. You can see here, this is actually our stormwater infiltration meadow here, and we planted it in masses, and it just gave a great texture and layering to the garden, and the flowers were very attractive to pollinators. And then after the flowers were done, you still have this kind of great yucca-like foliage here. So just a really neat plant for our region. So I've got a couple of those in my garden. Another plant that I'm trying this year that I bought at our Native Plant Festival is Great Blue Lobelia. So this is just got a lovely purple flower to it. It's going to be 3 to 4 feet tall. It's going to bloom in the summer all the way through into the early fall. And these lobelias are really attractive to hummingbirds and butterflies based upon the shape of the flower. So I've got a couple of these in my garden I'm excited about. And the color is just lovely. It's blue, this very bluey, purpley bloom on them. Another lobelia is the Cardinal Flower. So this is going to be 4 to 5 feet tall. This one's going to be more of a woodland or shade garden plant. We actually have it planted in our rain garden, so it doesn't mind a little bit of a wet foot. And it's just got these brilliantly red flowers on them. So just a great plant if you want a pollinator plant in your shade garden. This is a blazing star, one of my favorites. It's just got a great purple flower on it. It's going to grow 3 to 5 feet tall, likes full sun, doesn't mind heat and humidity. It blooms from the top down, so you can see it starts blooming at the top, and then the flowers subsequently open down the stalk there. This grows, in a little clump, so it's nice if you plant a couple of them in masses, at least 3, and just absolutely very attractive to bees and butterflies. And you can leave the seed heads, and those the seed heads will be eaten by birds. Here's another variety that was Leatrice Piccata. This is another species that we have growing in our meadow out there, and it grows a little bit differently. They come off in these little florets here off to the side. So I thought that was a really pretty variety of blazing star this year. I can't remember the name though. Oh, so last, and actually this is something that we planted in our new habitat along the Carolina Beach shoreline there. This is Seashore Mallow. So this is actually going to be salt tolerant. It's going to grow near brackish to nearly freshwater. So it's great for ponds. It's great, if you live in some place where you're going to get some salt spray. It's going to be kind of a shrubby, small herbaceous plant, or rather, 4 or 5 feet tall, small. The blooms do last one day, but they do produce just copious amounts of blooms. You can see all the buds on here. So this one's going to open, it's going to close, but new ones are going to open every day. And it's just going to be a bloomathon from July to October. And this is just going to be attractive to hummingbirds and butterflies. So imagine you're walking on the Carolina Beach Lake Loop, and you're walking by and just see a riot of bees and butterflies on all of those wonderful native plants there. So it's just going to be a great addition. So that's the end of the plants I'm going to suggest, but I do want to put in one little plug for North Carolina Sea Grant. They are a sister organization to Cooperative Extension, so they're also an extension of NC State, and they have come out with this Coastal Landscapes Initiative. So if you need help with kind of thinking about how you would lay these plants out, they actually have these wonderful landscape designs. So for instance, this one is a pollinator friendly border. They suggest specific plants. We didn't get into shrubs today, but this is sweet pepperbush, clethra, there's butterfly weed, wild blue indigo is a great spring blooming plant. Here's purple coneflower, and then they have grasses like pink muley grass. And it's going to show you how you could lay them out, what seasons they're going to bloom in. So you're covering a multitude of seasons. And then alternatives, and so if you have more dry soil, maybe you could grow yucca, which has a great stalk of flowers on it. And then how you maintain those plants as well. So great resource. So if you're interested in this, you can just type in Sea Grant Coastal Landscapes Initiative, and you'll find all the resources online. This is my little buddy at the Arboretum. I'm always looking for insects. I'm always trying to look down, look up, and notice the natural world around me. So thank you all for having me out here today. I had a ball, and I'd love to take any questions if we have time.
Thank you, Amy, so much for that wonderful presentation. I totally agree that it is so hard to pick a favorite plant. So you just—
I know, and I said this was my favorite every time.
We do have a few questions, and also thank you so much to everyone else who was able to join and participate in this webinar. I hope you learned a whole bunch about pollinator plants. So we do have some questions, and I believe Pat Kelly was raising her hand. So Pat, if you would like to unmute yourself, which is the microphone button, you may ask your question.
Well, my question really was, we were not able to see any of the screen shares.
Oh, no.
You weren't able to view the presentation?
No, so I'm hoping that when you send out the recording, maybe we'll get to see it that way.
Yes, absolutely. We'll make sure that you get the recording so that you can go back and view those pictures. Sorry you missed it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's see. Andy, if you'd like to— Sorry, Andy Detterline. If you would like to unmute yourself and ask your question, please go ahead. Is Andy still on the line?
I see him.
We can swing back around to him. Beth Harris, you had a question. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. I have a lot of the plants, but I had questions about deadheading. Like Stokes Aster was one that bloomed really early, and I wasn't sure if deadheading would help it, rebloom. The other ones I put on my list, Joe Pieweed too, if deadheading that also helps as well.
I think I have found with Stokes Aster, if you do deadhead, it doesn't have a terribly long, blooming season. So at some point it will peter out, but deadheading does help with, reblooming during its blooming season. So you might get some more blooms. I tend to cut them off and I'll lay them down, or if you want more Stokes Aster, I tend to let them dry And then, you know, when they're done, I kind of sprinkle the seeds around after I'm done. So I'm always shifting things around. And then Joe Pieweed, I have never, you know, it's such a wild kind of, you know, we have it in our native plant garden, so I've never deadheaded it before. We tend to let it just go a little wild, so I'll have to try that this year and see if it helps it to rebloom.
I did in Raleigh, and it bloomed, and it was great. And then, but by the end of June, it was done.
It was done, yeah.
Longer, so I didn't know if there was something I needed to do to help that happen.
I will ask the native plant garden folks here if they have any experience, and maybe even cutting it back a little bit might help it flush out again as well, and make it look a little bit better for the rest of the season when it's not blooming. You're welcome.
Awesome, thank you. Diane, do you have a question? Feel free to unmute yourself.
I do. I'm unmuted, I think. The blue mist flower just looked gorgeous. Is that good for a border? Is it low growing?
It is low growing. I want to say it's going to be about, you know, 2 to 3 feet tall. So you'd have to tuck it in your border where it would go. Now it is going to spread though. So if you got it in a good sunny spot, you might have a solid block of blue mist flower. So you can be prepared for that. But it's going to be really hardy, and it's going to bloom really well.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Diane. Let's see. Nancy Buckingham, do you have a question?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I bought an elderberry a few years, maybe 2 years ago, and I was looking forward to the berries and fruit, and I haven't had any fruit yet, so I'm wondering, what do I need to do?
So how big was your elderberry? It might not be mature enough to be producing fruit.
It's about 6 feet tall now. So
6 feet tall.
5 to 6, yeah. So I don't know, somebody mentioned having another one.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah, I'd have to look up. I'm not familiar with, you know, because some plants do need. Well, I don't think that elderberry would be, you know, a male and a female though. But I will. Let me take
it looks really robust.
Yeah,
it would be, you know,
you need 2. So Beth is saying that you might need a second one to be able to pollinate it. So that might be the ticket. So maybe you just need more elderberry. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome, great question. Mary Sarah, do you have a question?
I do. We in our community, we've started planting a lot more gardens, and I've noticed, especially this summer, the butterflies have come back, which is phenomenal.
Yeah.
So 2 questions, and you'll have to bear with me. They're short, but I'm just starting out. So I've noticed that along with the butterflies, brown moths, they are moths that are brown. I don't know if that's a variety, are coming back in significant abundance. Like for every 1 butterfly we might see, there might be 20 of these things flying through. So the question is, 1, are they a concern? And then 2, if so, is there a way to attract more of the butterfly types that we want and less of maybe some of the destructive types?
So, so by moths, you might mean skippers. They're like, their wings are, they're little brown guys, you know, they're kind of, you know, but they are super beneficial as well. So, okay. So I would, to me, there are very few that, you know, caterpillar forming skippers or moths that I would not want in my garden. Okay. So they're all going to be great pollinator plants or pollinators. And you know, kind of, that's another one of those things where there's a term I love. It's called charismatic megafauna, and that's what we think of when we think of butterflies, where they're so beautiful and they're flashy. And then we see our poor old brown moth, and you know, we think like,
if it's not destructive, I'm all good with it. I just
most moths aren't. I mean, there are certainly, you know, things that lay, and they will, you know, I think specifically there's an azalea, you know, caterpillar that will decimate your they'll eat all the foliage off, but then all the foliage will grow back. So, you know, it's just kind of like you know, none of those should be destructive moths or, you know.
Then it doesn't matter.
And the honest answer is that no, like you couldn't attract one kind of butterfly and keep away a different kind without hurting, you know. So
okay. Perfect. Yeah. That's all.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. And Richard and Sue, do you have a question?
Yes. Would you have some suggestions where we might be able to purchase some of these native plants? We found that sometimes our local garden centers don't really carry a broad variety. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that hopefully that will be changing. You know, the more that we demand, or you know, that the public has an interest or demand in it, the more that, you know, larger growers will grow them, and we'll be able to start seeing them in, you know, some of our box stores. But for right now, Shelton Herb Farm is a wonderful place to go and spend a lot of money. And but she's got, so that's out in Brunswick County. She's got just a great variety of native plants. There are other places that will have native plants or native shrubs, things like Johnson's Nursery or Five Oaks Nursery. They're going to have some, especially shrubs and things like that. There is, I might send out a resource with the, you know, like there are smaller places like Wild Bird and Garden sometimes has a native plant sale. So I'll try and send out a resource of what we have for native plant growers in our area. But certainly go out and visit Shelton Herb Farm, and you won't regret it. She's got tons of just wonderful stuff. Even Pender Pines will sometimes have different varieties, different cultivars of native plants as well. So that's a great place to spend a lot of money too.
Well, thank you very much. We look forward to the list. We love driving around and finding new places to buy native plants. And your presentation was terrific. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Awesome, thank you. And just to let everyone know, I know we're a little bit over, so if you need to leave the call right now, feel free to do so. We'll just keep going through a few more of these questions. So Barbara Albritton, if you would like to unmute yourself and ask your question, please feel free.
Actually, I have an answer.
Oh, yay.
If you want to grow elderberries for their fruit, you're going to need at least 2 different varieties that are known to make good berries, and they need to be planted no more than 60 feet apart.
Thank you so much, Barbara.
Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Excellent.
I learned something new today too. Yeah, like they must be like blueberries. You don't have to have 2 varieties of blueberries to have them fruit.
Yeah, I think so. That's great. Bill Willis, would you like to ask your question? Feel free to unmute yourself with the little microphone button. Okay, we can swing back around. Beth Harris, you have another question?
I do. Do you have any suggestions for good pollinator plants in shadier areas?
So that Cardinal Flower is going to do okay. I do have Stokes Aster planted in a like a dappled shade area, and it does okay there. Let me think of shadier. Thinking of my. I have a list of pollinator plants that are better for shadier areas. There can be less, you know, because a lot of these like a sunnier spot. But there certainly are some. So I'll try and send those out too when we send out the list of the places to buy. Yeah.
Awesome. I also find that sweet pepper bush, that was one shrub that we didn't really get to talk to, but that one is a pretty good bloomer in partial shade to sometimes full shade too. Okay, so Katie, would you like to unmute yourself?
Hi, thank you for that great presentation. I live in a condo building, so I have very little garden access in regards to planting shrubs and things of that nature. What would be your top pollinators you recommend for if I have to plant in all pots?
In all pots? That's a good question. I think we need to have a class on container pollinator gardening. You know, a lot of these, coneflower will probably do okay. Let me think back to what we had here. Because you want to have something, you know, whenever I think of a container, you always want to have the thriller, the filler, and the spiller, you know, so something upright. So, you know, that could be something like the coneflower, something that's going to be a little more fill in around the edges. So maybe something like Gaillardia might be good. And then it, you know, I would put in something that kind of spilled over the edge, and that might not be a blooming plant. But, you know, anything that's going to, you know, be compact and be able to, you know, fit in a nice container would do okay. You know, you're not going to be able to get a lot of these. So a lot of the ones that I suggested today are going to be kind of spreaders a little bit. But there are certainly, you know, anything that's blooming, and even if we're going not native, I would say things like zinnias are wonderful for containers, and they are, I mean, they are a butterfly riot. We plant, there's a lot of different bedding zinnias that we have here that we plant at the Arboretum, and you know, butterflies go wild for them. So anything that you can plant that's going to flower, you know, provide that pollen and nectar for your insects are going to be great.
That's awesome. Perfect.
But you gave me a new idea for container pollinator garden. I'm gonna.
I know, yeah. A lot of people. I actually live in an apartment, and I've been using grasses. I planted switchgrass and BlackEyed Susan, and those seem to do really well. If they do get really big, you may have to divide them and share with your friends. So as long as you don't mind sharing when they start to outgrow the pot, I would recommend some of those.
Yeah.
Do you have another question?
Well, I actually got bumped out of the meeting during part of that answer. Will the answers be on the recording that's sent back out to us?
Yes.
The question section. Okay, great. Thank you.
Good luck, Katie.
Awesome. Does anybody have any more questions? Feel free to hit the little raise hand button and we can swing back to you. Bill Willis, are you on the call and would like to ask your question?
I am on the phone right now. I really love the presentation. It had a lot of good information.
Oh, thank you.
The picture you showed of the milkweed, I noticed oleander aphids, and I know that the milkweed bug is also a notorious visitor. Do you try to control those two pests, or do you rely on the ladybugs?
Yeah, we on that plant, I would not recommend any insecticide. So the you know, if you have a small enough area, I would consider hand removal, as you know, it's very satisfying to squash aphids. Sorry, aphids, but no, you know, especially when you're talking about pollinator plants, you want to limit any kind of insecticides or herbicides as much as you can, just to make it, you know, as safe as you can for them. And so, especially with something like milkweed, where the caterpillar is going to be eating the foliage, I would not recommend any kind of insecticide there. And really, I did not find the aphids to do any significant damage. You know, they're there. They're kind of ubiquitous, and but I don't find them to be doing that much damage.
Okay, not a competitor then.
Not really, no.
Okay. At what point in time do we have to be concerned about nicotinoids spray on foliage and on plants that we buy from nurseries?
That's a good question. I mean, I would certainly try, if you're specifically trying to grow plants for your pollinators, I would avoid plants that have already been treated with neonicotinoids. There certainly is a linkage to, you know, bee decline. I think the jury's out on that. I think the research is still being conducted, you know, so I think that, but if your goal is to, you know, really support pollinators, I would avoid those plants that are being treated with those.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. I see Mary Sarah has another question.
Just one quick question. At one point, I think the extension services allowed you to like call and speak with somebody directly or have someone make a house call if in fact that can happen any longer to help. Is that, does anyone know where I might find more information on that program or who to call?
Yeah, absolutely. So, our all of our plant clinics are still open right now. There's just no walk-ins, but you can call. So what county do you live in?
I'm in New Hanover. I'm on Carolina.
So, okay.
So
you can call the extension office here. If you have a pen, I'll give you the phone number.
Okay.
It's 910-798-7660. And so they will send you to the Master Gardener Plant Clinic, and they can answer any kind of plant questions you have. Yeah, and so we're always a resource here. You might have to leave a message, but somebody will call you back to help you with your question.
I don't know that there's ever a real gardening emergency, although they seem like it at the time.
Well, we're serious about gardening emergencies. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Awesome, thank you. Sarah, do you have a question?
There we go. Yeah, so I found that in my yard, the soil is terrible. And the thing that did well was lavender. Is that, I mean, I know there's a lot of bees on it and hummingbirds buzzing around. Is this, I mean, is it native? Should I do more lavender, or how do you feel?
So lavender is not native, but that's okay. There's, natives don't equal bad, non-natives don't equal bad, and natives equal good. It's good to have a good diversity. The lavender probably does really well in your yard if you have very sandy, hot, dry. Like that's what lavender is going to like, and so that's probably why it's doing really, really well. I say keep growing it if you love it. If the bees love it, butterflies love it. I would just encourage you. I mean, if you want to plant more, do. But what we're talking about today is really adding those native plants to your garden. So keep on growing, lavender, and not native is okay too. Just think about adding in those natives to kind of create a diversity in your yard. So yeah, I love lavender too. And I can't grow it. I should try. I have the worst soil. I mean, my soil is like sand, fill. It's awful. I'm just always working on it.
Awesome. Does anybody have any more questions for Amy? If you do, just feel free to raise that little hand. All right, I think we're good. So feel free, if you do have any other questions about pollinator plants, you can find Amy at the, is it the Arboretum? Do you have like an email or anything?
So I'm with North Carolina Cooperative Extension. So you can go to, I'm actually located in the Brunswick office. So it's brunswick.ces. Wow, that's terrible. I don't even know my own. How about you just look up Brunswick County Cooperative Extension, and you can find our extension website and resources there. And you can find my email on there and contact me if you need to. Awesome. But I am located also at the Arboretum. So if you come for a visit, come for a walk, and you'll probably see me out in the garden.
Great. Amy, thank you so much for joining us today and giving this wonderful presentation. Yeah, thank you to everyone for hanging on and asking your questions. And let's look forward to spring.
Yay. All right. Thank you all so much. I had a great time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Hold on.
Amy, if you want to email me and if your contact information, I can send that out with the recording so people have it right there too.
Yeah, and I'll look for that resource that we created something for the Native Plant Festival that had native plant vendors around town. So I'll try and find that so you can send it out as well.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
All right. Bye, everybody.